Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program and discuss a double or triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's film block that we call Imaginary Friends. Nothing compares to a child's imagination. They're able to create fully functioning battlefields, star-faring space shuttle missions, and tea parties with guests from their favorite films and TV shows, even if those guests are of the animated variety. Pretend or imaginary friends are a healthy form of childhood play. Creating social interactions, even with someone not physically present, can be extremely beneficial to a child's development. But what if imaginary friends are not imaginary at all? What if they exist in our physical world and have the power to assist or influence the actions of a child or an adult? What if these imaginary friends aren't actually friends, but instead possess more nefarious plans for their host? Today's Grindhouse Institute block is a triple feature: Harvey from 1950, Cloak and Dagger from 1984, and the 2019 film Daniel Isn't Real. Dowd, Elwood P., a pleasant man in his early 40s, travels through life with his best friend, a 6-foot 3.5-inch tall invisible rabbit named Harvey, that only Elwood can see. Is Harvey all in Elwood's mind, or is he a manifestation of the puka, a Celtic shape-changing creature? An imaginative young boy named Davy is thrust into a global espionage conspiracy when a dying man hands him a mysterious Atari game called Cloak and Dagger. Davy, with the help of his imaginary friend Jack Flack, must keep the cartridge safe at all costs and out of the hands of the vile agents who want to end his life. A young Luke witnesses the horrifying aftermath of a mass shooting in his nearby coffee shop. Among the onlookers of this gruesome scene, Luke meets Daniel, a boy about his age who becomes his best friend, even though no one but Luke can see him. Now, in college, Luke looks to the imaginary Daniel to help him overcome his fears and anxiety. But at what price? Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
My name's Dowd, Elwood P. Hey, let me give you one of my cards.
Hello, everybody.
Come on, Kim, be serious. You coming?
Not if you're gonna be embarrassing.
All right, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I am Brian Foster. With me, as always, Jeremy Floyd. How are you?
Howdy. Doing all right.
Howdy. I love it.
Yeah.
Did I give you one of my cards?
Yeah.
We have a very special episode today, as every episode is special from what I'm gathering from my introductions. We have a triple feature for you, and this was one that kind of popped into my head. I think I was watching part of one of the films that we're talking about today, and I was like, wow, this is kind of a genre, and we should probably focus on this. So we're going to be focusing on films that are mainly about imaginary friends. On the surface level, they're imaginary friends, let's say that. But, the way that the stories work, each one of these movies, they have the elements of an imaginary friend. The protagonist has an imaginary friend who we follow, who we see. Usually the other people that are in the film, other characters do not see this person. But overall, there is always this divide whether or not this imaginary creature is alive, dead, or a spirit. But there's always that mixture at the end of a lot of these films where we don't know if it really did exist, and we kind of get the inkling that it did, or that it was a real thing. So the three films that we're talking about today, Jimmy Stewart's Harvey, about the giant 6-foot rabbit imaginary friend, with Jimmy Stewart. Cloak and Dagger, which stars from E.T. And Dabney Coleman, I love Dabney Coleman, but also Henry Thomas.
Henry Thomas, right.
Elliot, yeah, exactly. And Dabney Coleman, who I think around this time was in absolutely every movie around the 80s, around this time.
I have to say real quick that when I was first watching it, I was like, oh man, that Major Dad, he's playing the same role he had in Neverending Story.
It's the mustache.
It wasn't him. It was the other Major Dad.
Exactly. And then the third film we have today is Daniel Isn't Real, which is a newer film. I believe it came out 2-3 years ago. And it's
it came out last December.
Oh yeah, I figured it was very recent. Which is definitely a departure from the first two films that we're talking about here. But we're getting a great perspective on how different writers and different directors have portrayed these imaginary friends on film.
Yeah, no, that was it was an interesting mixing. And they almost followed the same structure beat by beat, which is that like
very much
first
so.
Act, it's this guy's just crazy, and the imaginary friend isn't real whatsoever. And by the third act, in every single one of them, multiple characters outside of the crazy one has seen or interacted with the imaginary friend.
Exactly. And then there were some beat points that were exactly the same. I mean, Harvey had an element where a portrait was painted, and the rabbit that was with him is painted with him. And
right.
In Daniel Isn't Real, it's the same thing. So we can get into those kinds of things, but I think that there were a lot of moments that were touched on in each of these films that are common throughout them. And let's talk about the obvious. A lot of these storylines are all about schizophrenia. Mental illness. I mean, I really think that that's the underlying tone of all these, but and I think loneliness also plays into a big part of these, especially Cloak and Dagger. Let's start with Harvey. What did you think? Was this the first time you've seen Harvey?
Yeah, it was. I was aware of Harvey. I was aware of like more or less the log line of Harvey.
Yeah.
And the
poster. It's always the shadow. Yeah.
Yeah, the sort of revisionist poster, or the I don't know what, re-release poster, home video poster, where it's Jimmy Stewart looking wistfully at a shadow.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was pretty surprised how the movie progressed, or whatever. It seemed to go in one direction and then kind of left you in a different one by the end.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be more of a comedy all the way through, and it actually wasn't, which was interesting.
Not really. It's almost a comedy in the way that It's a Wonderful Life is a comedy. It's very tragic in many ways, and it's a bit dark.
Yeah, that's true. I was kind of surprised how surprisingly dark it was. Yeah,
absolutely. So Elwood Dowd, who's Elwood P. Dowd, who's Jimmy Stewart's character, is. He's a 42-year-old man. He's a brother of, I think, Myrtle. No, Myrtle. No, that was the name of his sister, I believe. Well,
Vida.
Vida,
right?
yeah,
Myrtle
exactly.
May.
Myrtle May and Vida, yeah, those were that's who he lived with, his family. So they think he's absolutely crazy because he is going around talking about that he's being followed around by his best friend Harvey, who's this invisible 6-foot-tall rabbit, 6'3" rabbit. And no one can see him.
6'3.5", I believe.
I believe so. Yeah, exactly. So because he's such in their mind, kind of crazy, he's kind of driving away all of the family's friends, and they can't have any, normal family and friend time because people are just kind of creeped out by this odd character who keeps saying that there's an invisible person in the room, invisible monster in the room, really, when you think about it. Especially when you see the picture of it later,
painting,
like that would be scary as hell. Yeah,
I think this movie and Daniel Isn't Real have a real head-to-head situation with who has the more creepier painting. I mean, the one in Harvey was just horrifying.
It really was, and I'm thinking that if you put all three of these films together, you basically have Donnie Darko's apocalyptic bunny rabbit that comes out and tells.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's, some interesting things in Harvey I wanted to bring up. We get a little bit of... So Dowd is a really nice guy, and he almost seems a little bit too sweet. Almost, it seems like he's a bit on the spectrum when I think about how he acts and like his positivity. And he's very close-minded, or not close-minded, but very focused when he's speaking to, one person. Whenever you'd speak to... was her name Miss Kelly or
Miss Kelly.
Miss Kelly, yeah. And so, there was these moments where you felt like, well, he's just kind of in his own head, and I think in many ways there is a bit of autism there. At least it would be maybe touched on in a current version of this.
Maybe that's where I thought they were going at the beginning, the way it opens with their sort of stately Victorian manner. Also, the way that Jimmy Stewart's sister is dressed. Which, okay, by the way, Jimmy Stewart's sister, the whole time I thought it was like a deep fake of Rip Torn in a dress. Like she looks so much like Rip Torn. It was so weird.
Yeah.
May I ask why you felt little Tiffany deserved to die?
But anyway, so we start off in this this Victorian manor. Like it doesn't even look like it's 1950, which is when the movie was released. It looks like it could have been in the sort of late 1800s. It feels a little like Rebecca or one of those a Portrait of Dorian Gray almost. The type of Gothic madness.
A Hammer film or something.
Yeah. And what was interesting was that like it seemed like that's what they were going for was that he was on the spectrum, but he actually sort of explains himself toward the end of the movie that he had this epiphany and decided to just be totally open and have this thing, and his wealth and whatever else allowed him to act that way because he doesn't have to work and he doesn't do anything. He just kind of
goes to the
around
bar.
And,
goes to the bar every day. Two martinis every day. He says, at least
finds random people, invites them over for dinner, and that's what you can do in that situation. But he essentially explains his mindset or whatever, and like when he was talking to the head psychiatrist or whatever it was of that
Dr.
mental
Chumley
institution, Dr. Chumley,
yeah.
That he in explaining his mindset, he sort of pulls Chumley in to that mindset as well, and it's an interesting effect because they don't quite land either way. Is it just that he has this mindset and this thing is real, or did he like infect Dr. Chumley with his madness or whatever? Right.
And then, watching, and I don't mean to jump past Cloak and Dagger, but watching Daniel, it's like, now is this imaginary creature now, like you said, infecting him, and now is he going to terrorize him for the rest of his life and make him go to Charlie's bar every day and drink martinis? Obviously, Daniel is a little bit different in terms of tone, but I really agree with you fully. I think that I was a little confused as to whether Harvey, before the very ending of the film, obviously, but I was confused whether or not the doctor just kind of opened himself up to believing in a Harvey, in that kind of motivational spirit that you might have that is making you do nice things, or like, it's almost like a good side of your conscience, and maybe he was opening himself up to it, and he accepted that as well. Because, he has a little bit of a transformation, the doctor. Obviously when he sees Harvey, he, the doctor that he fired originally, he brings him back, and like he has this big change of heart. He wants to go to Akron, Ohio, I guess, to go in this beautiful cabin with the maple trees and all that.
Pause time.
Well, because, we find out that Harvey has powers, right? That Harvey can look at a clock and stop time, bring you to wherever you want to go in any time for as long as you want, come back, and not a minute has passed on the clock. I thought that was interesting, but they didn't really delve into that, did they?
They explained that it is a thing that exists. I mean, I guess we have to take Jimmy Stewart's word for it because that we didn't actually see that manifest. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the movie, it definitely comes down on the side that Harvey is real, in the sense that everyone else seems to see him. Like, things do sort of happen magically, like the door closes on its own, or it's like locked on one side and then not on the other, and
the coin purse appears out of nowhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess there were some sort of objective places where Harvey had manifested. So I mean, it definitely seems like that the movie had chosen that route for what the reality was. Although, it does feel like at least some of this could be that the madness is catching sort of possibility anyway. But it was definitely a pretty interesting movie. I think had maybe they shaved some of the stuff with the the younger doctor and Miss Kelly down. That kind of felt like it wasn't going anywhere, and then it turned out not to go anywhere.
It didn't go anywhere. Yeah, I mean, he did set them up together, and I guess that was kind of his mission, was to get them together, those two, in a way. But that was kind of in passing. He's like, "Do you want to dance?" "Oh yeah." Well, I don't dance anymore. Maybe you two should dance, and that's kind of the end of their relationship. I mean, we see them later, but that was like the only moment that we see that he set them up.
Perhaps you'd like to dance, Miss Kelly.
All right, Mr. Dowd, if you'd like to.
Oh, not I. I'm sure Dr. Sanderson would love to dance with somebody as lovely as you.
So I guess he was just doing a good deed in that instance.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that could have been part of his character and everything, and that's fine. It just, there was this whole thing where Miss Kelly was sort of magnetically attracted to Jimmy Stewart, and then, but then there was this weird tension between her and the younger doctor.
Very weird tension.
That, sort of ended up going nowhere, or like, we had a scene with them, when he thought he was fired, and
I just came to say goodbye.
Yeah,
I guess you're not going to miss me then. I'm not going to miss you at all. It was like, whoa, where did that come from?
Being a dick for some reason, and anyway, it's just like it seems like some of that you could have trimmed the fat on that a little bit and kind of made the movie a little tighter, but overall I think it worked really well and kept you going.
I think a big piece that they kind of missed out on in terms of, having a good, I guess Hitchcock called it the MacGuffin, that item that's always in the movies,
Mm-hmm.
In this one, it would be Formula 977, which is that, that serum that they were going to give him. That's
because it was like a cocktail of different drugs that they were going to
exactly.
treat him up with.
What I'm assuming is it's kind of like an opiate, and it like dumbs you down, almost like a heroin at the time, or a morphine. But it feels we get all that information of what they do there at that office from the cab driver, who is a character that is introduced so much later down the line, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, people go in here and they come out not the same.
Yeah.
I used to go watch sunsets with them, and now they just become normal assholes like everyone else. And it was like, so what is this formula? And I think that might have been. That I think now with like current writing and stuff, that would probably be a little bit more of an important piece, that maybe, an evil doctor is trying to, prevent Harvey from becoming real or something like that by, keeping the person at bay with this Formula 977 or something like that. But yeah, I overall, it's a sweet film. Jimmy Stewart, again, is kind of like a scene stealer, I think, or a movie stealer. I think he just has really good lines, and he just delivers them really well. He just seems like a really, really sweet guy in this, and obviously it's an interesting take. By the end, though, we see a lot of physicality with, what Harvey is actually touching or bumping into or sitting on or things like that. And it's just more and more things are starting to move without us seeing somebody move them. And it's like they kind of like rampart that at the end.
He manifests a lot more to the audience as, he starts to appear to some of the characters as it goes on. Yeah, and I think you're right. Like the casting of Jimmy Stewart here is a sort of a perfect one, because, he's a really hard person to hate or like be annoyed with, where in the beginning in particular, when he's, just so bizarre, and he's like constantly seems like he's not listening and all this kind of stuff. Like if he was cast differently, you could imagine it would be harder for the audience to want to go on this ride with him,
Yes, I agree. I like the move that he would consistently do is he'd be walking with him with his arm on here, and then he'd always switch sides with him. Like, oh, you should go over here. And it was just like a very natural thing to do.
Right.
I thought that was really sweet. So I thought what was interesting is when we find out how Dowd actually meets Harvey, and he explains to Dr. Chumley how that happened. And it was just between 18th and 19th Street on Fairfax, I think he said, where this all happened, at the corner, when he put his drunk friend who was mixing gin and rye into a cab. And once he sent his friend away, he saw a giant bunny rabbit, tall, I guess, personified bunny rabbit standing on the street lamp, just like waiting for him or waiting to meet him. And he says, well, what's your name? And he's like, well, what name do you like? I like the name Harvey. Right. So, well, that's interesting because that's my name too. I thought that was a pretty interesting way to bring it about, but I still don't understand exactly where Harvey came from.
Well, the explanation they give multiple times in the movie is that he's this, he's a puka, which is a Celtic myth, what do we call it? A creature from Celtic mythology.
There you go.
That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And it, it has these sort of magical powers as we see demonstrated in things like supposedly being able to stop time and then, being invisible and walking through doors and all this kind of stuff. And maybe this is, I wonder if this is like limitations of special effects and everything else at the time, but they never show him in any way other than maybe the painting, which you can argue is just an artist having to like humor this eccentric, rich, crazy person,
Right.
For his commission here. So the explanations were given. Okay, Jimmy Stewart's story. We just have to take. We just have to take his word for it.
Exactly, and I can accept that. Like I'm fine with that. I just think that because I'm so ingrained in origin stories and things like that now in movies that I want the full breath. I want the flashback scene to go back to where he was putting this guy in the car and all of a sudden, this giant rabbit appears out of nowhere, but I guess you're right. That's due to limitations of the time. Yeah.
Well, but even if they maintained the invisibility thing in that flashback, okay, so he tells the story, but you don't necessarily need to see it. It's like in Night of the Living Dead. He talks about the truck.
Mm-hmm.
And well, there's one way you could do it where you see what happens, or it can just be that he tells a story, which is sort of how Barbara would experience that in Night, and how all the various characters in Harvey would experience Jimmy Stewart's story.
So we're kind of seeing this from Chumley's perspective.
Well, it removes us, from Jimmy Stewart's perspective, and is able to sort of keep that ambiguity there. Whereas, like, for instance, in Daniel Isn't Real, we only really see Daniel from Luke or whatever his name was, perspective, the sort of main character, and so through that main character's eyes, this is all real, and there's sort of no question that it can't be.
Right.
And if you are showing the Jimmy Stewart character in sort of the third person this way, you just have to take his word for it, or like, there's that wiggle room where the story could or could not be happening the way he's describing it.
And again, would you be able to take anyone's word for it if it wasn't Jimmy Stewart? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Jimmy Stewart, I'm purple and I have 3 heads. I believe you.
Very good.
I guarantee you
Right
do.
on, man. Yeah.
To switch gears a bit, going into Cloak and Dagger, we're introduced to the imaginary character through like this almost spy adventure film at the beginning of the movie. That opening that they've got. When we find out that this opening, which is basically a James Bond type situation. A guy named Jack Flack, who's a secret agent, parachutes down into...
You know what's funny? The whole time I kept hearing Jack Black. And I was like, oh, that's funny. And this is before, I don't know if he was famous or, an actor or anything.
He was still doing Atari commercials at the time.
Was he really?
Just last night, I was lost in the jungle with Pitfall Harry.
Have you seen that old commercial with Jack Black? Okay,
well that would have tied into this game with all the Atari shit.
Exactly.
Or this movie, I mean. But anyway, and then I saw in the credits that it was Jack Flack, and I was like, oh, they were saying Flack the whole time.
Flack, yeah.
Anyway.
Jack Flack is a spy played by Dabney Coleman. He goes and infiltrates this giant mansion. Clearly, there's some nefarious operations going on inside. Very, very James Bondish.
Yeah, it looked like a Soviet embassy or something.
Right. Yes, and we find out as he's chased down by giant 20-sided dice that this is actually a board game that they're playing called Cloak and Dagger. I thought that was a really cool transition. I thought that it was a nice intro to who this Jack Flack character is, but it also gives you how detailed of an imagination that this boy Davy, I believe Davy, what he has in terms of his the level of how deep his imagination goes to make sure that he's also a spy and is just as cool as Jack Black.
Right. Yeah, and it was an interesting reveal that the person that he sees his imaginary friend and all this stuff is sort of superhero version of his father.
Exactly.
But this one too, kind of like what I was just describing with Daniel Isn't Real, doesn't give you much of an option to not see Jack Flack as being real, right?
He's in every scene.
He's in every scene. He's we're experiencing this all from Elliot's point of view, and whenever something's going wrong, he consults with his imaginary friend, and we see him. That was, I guess, that kind of interesting thing about Harvey is like, even if they could have done the special effects 6'3.5" rabbit, which ironically would have been shorter than the Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart would have been looking down at Harvey the whole time.
Yeah. I know they should have made him 7 foot rabbit.
Yeah, exactly. At least
too tall. But if we had seen it in Harvey, it would have made it harder to have that reading that Harvey doesn't exist, right? Whereas in Cloak and Dagger and Daniel, because we see these imaginary friends and these we see them personified, and because it's from the main character's perspective the whole time, if we had seen it from Elliot's best friend, the sassy little chick, from her, like, going from not believing to believing and all this kind of stuff, it might have been more along the lines of Harvey. But because it's from Elliot's perspective the whole time, it is very clearly that this guy exists, and like the movie wants you to believe that he exists or whatever. There's no alternate reading. Is what I'm trying to say.
With the difference being is that Jack couldn't touch anything. He couldn't actually help Elliot or help Davy with any of his problems.
That's true. That's what separates this from the other two movies for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He could only coach him through stuff. The only time he was could interact with the world is when he's shot at the end. Obviously, metaphorically shot. Right. Davy's kind of giving up on this imaginary hero, and then understanding that he himself, has the power inside of him to do this, without the help of Jack Flack.
Well, he has the power inside of him to infect Michael Murphy with his madness, I guess, because
Michael Murphy.
Yeah, that guy goes and turns the gun on the empty wall or whatever.
Exactly. So I was even, as a kid, I was confused by that, and watching this again for this podcast, I was confused. He did see him, right? He does kind of materialize in front of the wall.
Yeah, for sure. And that was one of the things that kind of blew Davy's mind at that point too, where he was just like, "Well, wait, what?"
yeah. He's like, "I thought you were mine."
Yeah. I mean, I guess this one too is distinct. Cloak and Dagger is distinct from the other two movies because he interacts with Jack Flack, but doesn't sort of believe that he's a real person. He knows that he's imaginary.
It's his motivation, if anything. Yeah.
Trying to kill us.
You can't kill me. You can't see me.
You can kill me.
Not if you're good enough.
And it's just more of an inspiration to him based on, the games and the storylines that he's been reading and the arcade game or the Atari game that he was playing. And speaking of the Atari game, obviously as a gamer, this really excited me as a kid that they were playing video games, and that was where the secret code was for something, right?
Also, by the way, to get to the sort of MacGuffin secret government spy stuff,
you got to play the game.
You had to play the game and win.
You had to do really well in the game, and it looked like a really difficult game.
Yeah, even the, I don't know what he was, the other criminal from Raising Arizona, I can't remember his name.
Yeah,
William
Bill Forsythe.
Yeah. Even he was having trouble doing it. He was, playing the comic book guy from The Simpsons, and he was he had to really hack hard to get to the center of that one.
He had to open it
okay,
up.
Well, which agency, which old man, the old man who turned out to be sort of the main bad guy in this, who the whole time I was like, who is that? Who is that? And he was the sheriff in Psycho.
I was gonna say
is what I was thinking.
This was a very, very Hitchcock. So first of all, visually, I think Cloak and Dagger looked like Hitchcock. There were some shots down the stairs and things like that were very Hitchcock. Also, these are the people from The Man Who Knew Too Much. It's the older couple, right, that they meet that are so sweet and so perfect.
Yeah. The Draytons.
They're the ones that had the missing fingers on the hand and all that stuff. I thought that was really a great reveal.
Straight out of 39 Steps. Speaking of Hitchcock.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that shot was from that too. Down the stairs, it's all square. They did it in M, and they brought it back
I know
in.
what you're talking about,
yeah.
But anyway, what I was gonna say was like, there's almost no way that the sheriff from Psycho would have been able to play this game and beat it to get to the secret. It's like, it's kind of a funny.
But also, this old guy's just carrying around one Atari cartridge in his photo bag, in his camera bag.
Right.
Oh, so you've got a camera and this Atari game. You must be fine. Yeah. But no Atari.
Right.
Yeah, I thought, watching this again, I did not like it as much as I liked it when I was a kid. I guess
You don't say.
there was, it just felt so like dry and there wasn't much that happened. There were a few action pieces, but nothing really happened.
The pacing,
yes,
needed some help. But man, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I really like the little girl.
I'm having my breakfast. I'll call you back later.
Is he always like that?
Usually.
Doesn't it drive you crazy?
Nah, he's the only boy in the neighborhood who isn't boring.
Well, what's his father like?
Forget it. He's not your type.
She was great. Yeah.
Yeah, as the really sassy and ball breaking, down to earth and skeptical sidekick to Elliot's,
she was
insane.
the grounder, right?
Yeah.
She brought him back to reality, brought us back to reality. I think, in many instances it was kind of, well, it was always from his perspective, but if it would have been from hers, I think that it's still been a strong movie to have him on, her trying to follow him and be like, all right, I'll go with what you want to do because I like you, but you're a very strange person.
Yeah, but you're nuts, dude. Yeah, exactly. That would be interesting if you were to do this one again.
I think we've mentioned, or at least I have mentioned, a remake of every one of the films that we've watched. Apparently, all I want to do is remake movies.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm okay with that.
You're hard up for ideas, but
just like Hollywood.
Yeah, there you go. But also, what was interesting about this movie is that it takes place in San Antonio, and it really features sort of the Riverwalk and like sort of the
beautiful,
that's something that's like one of those cities you just you don't see it in films very often, and it was kind of refreshing to see it.
I agree.
To see it like have the city become kind of a character.
It really was,
and having it be like not New York, Chicago, LA, like the San Francisco. It's like these main cities that are in tons of movies. It's sort of a tertiary bigger city, and it made for an interesting setting
and great locales. I thought the Riverwalk alone was beautifully shot. There was really cool scenes there, and they returned to that a few times in that film, obviously because it photographed so well, I think.
Yeah.
I think this story really lends itself to Davy filling a void, and he wants to see his dad as a hero. This is kind of my interpretation. He really wants to see his dad as the next hero that's going to kind of show him the way, because he's the only one left. His mom's gone now. He doesn't have any more guidance, so he he transforms this extreme superhero in Jack Flack into his dad, who's Jack Flack is just a little figure or just some little cartoon character on the screen, but he fleshed it out in his head to make it more something personal, and I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah, no, that was cool. And I think just going back a second to the idea of a remake or whatever, it turns out this movie was a remake. It was based on a Cornell Woolrich short story, who did a ton of pulp stories, and it was originally filmed in the late 40s, and it was called The Window. So it might be an interesting one to watch later on sometime. It was a film noir version of this story. So this is a totally constituted version
Yeah.
of like, okay, well, let's take this film noir pulp story and turn it into something for from a kid's perspective or whatever.
And it still was very film noir, and for a kids movie, quite violent and
Yeah.
I mean, pretty scary. Chrissy and I were watching this together, and she's like, these are some pretty freaky moments. I mean, there's a lot of killing on screen. There's a lot of threatening of a kid's life on multiple occasions, and it's a tough movie. It's probably the scariest kids movie I think I've ever seen, other than, like The Dark Crystal or something, which just looks weird. But this was genuinely like scary in parts.
Yeah, or Never-Ending Story was pretty disturbing, I guess, in parts. That was around this time.
But that's got creatures. This was like
that's true.
Just an 80s looking movie, but it was just
this is like,
we're gonna kill you, kid. We've got
exactly.
We got your friend.
3 adults are like trying to hunt and murder this kid the whole time,
and they can't get him.
and you're right, and it's not like exactly. There's that remove that you have in something like Never-Ending Story and Dark Crystal, where it's like, okay, well, you clearly know that they're puppets and this stuff isn't real, and
right.
When you walk outside and you're not seeing that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're walking outside here, any sort of adult could be someone wanting to kill you.
Even the nice old couple that sits behind you on the tour bus.
Yeah, exactly.
And how that guy kept switching seats to sit closer to him. I'm like, is this not obvious to everyone what this guy's trying to do right now? Like, and he kept taking the next one over.
The old lady is like, he looks like a pervert.
I was gonna bring that up. I got a note. That part cracked me up.
Yeah.
But overall, I think that pacing aside and stuff, I think it had a nice story. Definitely fits within this podcast, or at least this block, very well. And I think that we can, unless you had anything else to say about Cloak and Dagger, we could probably move on to Daniel.
It's common for people to see things that aren't real.
I imagined you. I can make you go away.
Well, then you might as well cut your own head off.
Now, quite a different film from Harvey and Cloak and Dagger. Daniel, which is, it's the second outing from a horror director, Adam Egypt Mortimer, and I'm blanking on his first film. But this was produced by Elijah Wood's company, Spectravision. Mm-hmm. And they've been putting out a lot of movies that are in this genre, the horror genre, psychological genre. They just did Color Out of Space, things like that. And this definitely fits within their wheelhouse of types of titles that they're creating. I really, really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was excellent. I thought visually stunning. I thought effects-wise it was great. I thought the performances were fantastic, and I enjoyed this one thoroughly. I don't know how you feel of it.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. I hadn't heard of the movie. In fact, I tried to stay away from looking at it because I wanted to kind of go into it pretty fresh. And I definitely see the Spectravision stamps there, like just even from the poster, right? It has that sort of neon pink and blue.
Exactly. Yep.
And also the way it starts with the sort of cosmic horror, the H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know what the
black hole. Right. Yeah. The singularity, whatever that is.
Which I thought for sure, like, I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is not where I thought this was going to be. And then it sort of tries to transition into the coffee mug, and it didn't quite come together transition wise.
That was pretty smooth.
Well, you didn't like? I thought it was going to be more like, okay, it's going to turn into the cream of the coffee, but then it was like, I don't know, a foamy cappuccino or something from a second wave coffee place. Did we ever come back to the coffee place, by the way?
Well, I mean, in a way, because he was searching out who he saw.
Oh.
And so he made his way back there, because that's like the incident, right? The inciting incident to get him infected by Daniel was seeing this brutal murder that occurred inside this coffee shop out of nowhere.
I see.
And so like that was kind of our intro. And he does, I guess they don't actually return there inside, but they do return there through, the newspaper clippings and things like that. So it does make a return.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I hadn't quite put that together. For some reason I thought they were going to come back to it because it was clearly like a cold open, and then they went to Luke or whatever his name was as a young kid. I was also I was very disoriented, I'd say, in the first, 30 minutes of the movie, because when we get to what becomes the sort of present, when Luke is a, late teen, early 20s college student, it more or less is, I don't know what's supposed to be now, but when he is a kid, it looks like now. And then when we first get to him as a young man, we see him at this Enchantment Under the Sea dance, but it looks like the 90s. So I don't know. It was very it was very disoriented. The past looked like the present, and the present looked like the past, and it was.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even see that. Yeah, I didn't catch up on that.
I was kind of wondering where we were in time, and maybe it didn't. Maybe it wasn't that important, but maybe it was just a production design thing. I don't know, but where we were in time was disoriented at first. Also, it's funny how aesthetically speaking, especially when we get to that first flashback where Luke's parents are arguing and divorcing or whatever. It's shot with that sort of this really cold, David Fincher look.
Very much so.
Very sort of removed, and we have a couple vignettes of him as a little kid playing with his imaginary friend, and in some of those scenes, what you felt like you really wanted was sort of that thing that that Carpenter always nails, which is being able to have it be creepy and sort of sunny and nostalgic at the same time, right? So it's when you're talking about the opening of Halloween, either the cold open with the oneer, or the introduction of sort of Laurie and her story, or if you're talking about Prince of Darkness, both of those, you have sort of these sunny and idyllic settings for everything, whether that's the USC campus or sort of the Haddonfield, Illinois, or
Halloween night.
Actually, it's South Pasadena, but whatever.
Right.
It keeps that sunny and idyllic feel, but also keeps it really creepy, and that allows you, I feel like, to be lulled into getting into these characters a little better. Whereas with this cold clinical remove that this movie has, I felt, well, I'm just kind of clinically observing these specimens in a petri dish.
Interesting.
And it didn't have that place to connect in that same way.
Plus, there was never any lull, right? It was all pretty dark and it was all pretty depressing. There wasn't much of a. There were some happy moments, I guess, but. That's kind of the thing is with that style, with that Fincher coldness style, it felt very flat. One note. It didn't kind of ebb and flow and build toward sort of have a low level horror and build toward a peak in horror. It was kind of just super creepy the whole time, and you wanted to feel that contrast a little more. And I feel like that could have been easily achieved had Daniel's college roommate not been such a scumbag. And let me tell you, let me tell you why. I think that if those two got along, there would have been, a really good friendship or bond that was built throughout that, them living together. They're just roommates. They were probably just put together because that's how college admission works.
Yeah. You get luck of the draw or whatever.
Right. They become close. They're buddies, whether or not they're extreme best friends, but they hang out or they do stuff together. And then when they bring these girls over to see that change of Daniel shifting and beating the shit out of his roommate as Daniel, Luke beating him up as Daniel, I think that would have been a greater shift, because that ultimately is that climactic moment of the film when Daniel does take over, or at least starts to take over. Well, he does, because that's when he says, if I'm doing it, you're not cheating. So, let me take over for a bit.
Right.
In the most disgusting way possible.
Yeah. And almost, that again, gets into some of that, Lovecraftian body horror, almost
absolutely.
The Thing
Absolutely.
type of metamorphosis. But yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think because that was one of the things where it's okay, so he unleashes the Hellraiser, sort of because one day he's just playing with his teddy bear at his mom's house and is like, well, what the hell? I'm bored. And just does it. Whereas if he had been hanging out and accepted by his roommate, and they had a friendship, and they had a thing, and then they had a falling out, and then he became more and more isolated, and he like retreated back to this imaginary friend for that confidence and emotional support, it would have sort of made more sense, but I mean, the way it happened, they lock him away in the very beginning, and then he sits in there for 12, 15 years, more or less. I mean, it's quite a while.
Yeah, and grows with Luke,
and it seemed like you'd want to have an event in his young adulthood that makes him retreat back into that. They didn't quite get it there.
All he did was go visit his mom. It seemed like from school, he was just kind of going to visit her. But I don't think they really gave that.
And then she's like comically insane or whatever. Like, I didn't want to see myself.
Yeah,
like, okay.
I thought it was a little over the top. There were some good moments from her, but I was hoping, and I
They're
think
like,
that
listen, just do Jack Nicholson from The Shining, but more.
I think that's kind of what it was, right? And I think that
Wendy, I said I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in.
Bash your fucking
bash your brains right the fuck in.
I think that they were using her as kind of the wool to pull over your eyes to say, oh, he's got he's schizophrenic just like she is, or at least another mental illness that he's got passed on through genes, genetics. That he's now dealing with, but he's dealing with something else. But in fact, Daniel is real. Daniel is some sort. He calls himself a traveler. He's he says for hundreds of years or centuries he's been helping people along and to jump inside these people as kind of like their Sherpa, if you will, to basically do nasty shit. Really, the first person we see is he blows an entire coffee shop away. And that's how we're introduced in many ways to Daniel, or to what his powers can do.
Yeah, and his like influence. Yeah, and it's he's the the sort of the devil on your shoulder or whatever. It's
most literally too. I mean, he's definitely a demon.
Right, and it acts sort of like The Exorcist, where it's like the demon jumps from Reagan to the priest at the end. But yeah, and then if he had that falling out, and then Daniel helps him get his mojo back or whatever, you'd sort of be into it, and then when it crashes again, and crashes even harder, it would be, it'd be sort of more tragic in that sense, and then you'd be into the like what happens. It's funny because it felt like at that point you're talking about the why don't you tag team me in here, buddy, and we'll switch bodies, and that was, I don't know what, an hour into it.
Sure.
The game was sort of over at that point, and it kind of had a long way to go, and it felt like that should have been a bigger decision for him to,
instead of just in the moment. But I agree with you. I think that there was it was just too easy, right? It's like, okay, now step toward me and I'm going to, suck my face into your face.
Yeah. The decision was too easy.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
okay,
exactly. Yeah. The decision for him to let him suck his face into his own. And,
yeah.
But that Daniel is Arnold Schwarzenegger's kid. I thought he did pretty well.
What's funny is, that they should have called this movie Nepotism Isn't Real, because, it's Schwarzenegger's kid and Tim Robbins' kid. Tim Robbins' kid was the one who looks like Casey Affleck crossbred with Jack White.
He looks like it. I didn't know that was Tim Robbins' kid. Miles Robbins, yeah.
Yeah. So I like I said, I didn't know anything about this movie. I didn't recognize the actors when I saw them, but I saw Schwarzenegger in the credits. Okay, well, obviously there's no mistaking that name. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh, well, that's also Tim Robbins.
He was also in Halloween, the one that was just by David Gordon Green, the recent Halloween film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Didn't see it. And I also didn't see the Rob Zombie one either.
Well, let's not talk about the Rob Zombie one. You haven't seen the new Halloween?
No. I saw the original Halloween and I like it too much, and
I
imagine anything else would be a step down.
No, well, I don't want to say that it's not, but I do want to say that I think you should see that movie because it's a really well done sequel to that movie.
Sequel?
It is 100% a sequel.
It's not a reboot? It's not a remake?
It's a sequel. It's
Oh,
it's
okay.
a 30-year later or
So
40-year later sequel.
They chop off Halloween 2 and then just put this one in its place?
Kind of. I don't want to tell you, but they everything is touched on really nicely. It's kind of a side note, yeah.
Gotcha.
All
right. Well,
but
we'll
I think you
take a
should
look at it,
definitely
yeah.
see that.
Yeah. What were we talking about with this one? We were talking about Patrick Schwarzenegger and Miles Robbins.
Daniel isn't nepotism, or nepotism isn't real, you said?
Yeah.
That might be the name of this podcast.
Also, I love. I didn't realize who this was at first, especially because it was always in those sort of really dark silhouette. Again, that very David Fincher look.
Backlit.
But Luke's mom, I thought it was like, I was like, oh man, is this the low budget Robin Wright light? She's like
Mary Stuart Masterson?
Yeah, I mean, she has that sort of look of the House of Cards era Robin Wright, and
she has been in a ton of movies.
Yeah,
she's had quite a career. Yeah,
I realized later that she was a known quantity, but
I thought it was Robin Wright Penn too.
At first, I had that like yeah, get me a Robin Wright type.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever we can afford.
We have Mary Stuart Masterson.
Yeah, close enough.
Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, also, I meant to mention this earlier. So we were talking about Cloak and Dagger and how it was a reveal that we went from the sort of Soviet embassy where he's kicking the ass of this I don't know what he was, like the sort of Nazi general and the 8-foot tall beauty queen, and then we see the giant 8-sided die or whatever rolling in. And similarly, in the beginning of this movie, when Daniel is playing swords or whatever, and we see that castle, it looked very similar to how the sort of 3-walled set of the D&D dice coming to life, or the fantasy coming to life anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
It was a pretty interesting connection.
And I thought there were some cool other moments like that. Obviously that was the first one. There was the sound of the parachute that they would shoot out whenever they would do the parachuting. And then whenever Daniel would hold a broom or a shovel or whatever the hell he was, it would become a sword. And it actually became sword at the end. And that all came around at the end. I thought that was really well looped back, because the very beginning of the film is the young kid with his young imaginary friend playing make-believe swords in the living room, and then that's how the climactic battle with this demon ends. And it kind of had like a modern day medieval mythology kind of feel to it, in my opinion. Like the demon wouldn't be killed by guns or anything normal, but because Daniel could kind of step into this in between of both and see both sides of it, he had the power to destroy this demon, which he doesn't. A bit of a tragic Luke, yes, yeah, sorry. Not a very happy-go-lucky ending by any means.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I'd argue that you could look at it by saying Daniel was never there. Luke did have problems, and Luke did commit suicide at the end. But we don't know. I mean, we do see Daniel at the end who takes the swan dive off the building, but whether or not that was just stylized, or the kind of like the demon leaving Luke now that Luke is dead. I guess you could look at it in many different interpretations, but overall, I thought for being a tough movie to end, I thought they did an all right job with it.
Yeah. Oh, what's the final shot? It's the melted candle wax face demon in the dark or whatever. He's like, I'm the abyss, that guy.
He's kind of, he's becoming that like king demon, whatever that is.
He looked like in that shot, he looked like the you got a lot of nerve showing your face around here guy from Total Recall.
Who's the guy from Breaking Bad?
Oh, yeah. Dean Norris?
Yeah, exactly. So I had a question. When Luke switches sides with Daniel, and Daniel ultimately throws him into the dollhouse.
Uh-huh.
And we're in the dollhouse now, which is clearly, like you said, this Lovecraftian in-between worlds cosmic area, this like prison. There was a monster inside the dollhouse.
Right.
With a
Right,
very
right.
similar face to Daniel, but it wasn't Daniel. It was like something else. I'm wondering what the hell that was. Maybe it was hell. But I'm wondering what that actually was, or if you had any interpretation of that. Or was it just another shock scene and we needed some action piece in there?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I had sort of checked out a little bit. I don't know. It was the movie was getting on my nerves a little bit, but
The divide between you and I and like our love of movies is so great that I think that's why this podcast is successful. I want to say that.
yay, it's successful.
I come in, Daniel isn't real. It's so good. It's got these great scenes. You're just like, I was checked out by about minute 40. By the time something really cool happens, I was kind of like out of it.
Well, I was sitting there. Okay, so right before that scene, right before he gets to the "I'm the Abyss" guy, and looks at melted guy from RoboCop, he wanders through like these like medieval castle catacombs, and he's like running down the thing with like it's
With the
neon,
neon?
But there's also
I love that
also
look.
catacombs.
I love it.
And it looks so much like In the Mouth of Madness, right before the not so great demons are starting to chase after him. And I was thinking, you know what? I'd rather be watching In the Mouth of Madness right now.
Which is shocking to me because, of Carpenter's films, that's arguably like the lesser of his great films. And I'm surprised that you actually like In the Mouth of Madness. Or are you just saying that you'd prefer it?
Well, yes. No, but it's one of his lesser of his, still watchable films.
But I love it.
It's only lesser because there are a couple, problems in the middle, which is like once we get the idea that he drives through town and he keeps looping and looping and looping, we do that like 40 times. Like, okay, got it. Like,
yeah.
That scene in the catacombs that we were just describing, in particular, the monsters didn't quite work out, and he didn't turn the lights down, enough to only give you impressions of them. Essentially, once In the Mouth of Madness, once they get to the sort of demon town,
Hobbs End,
that needed to happen like really quickly, and that's fine. And then it would be great to get him out. You think it's over. He talks to Charlton Heston, and he's like, "No, we got to stop this book. We got to stop this book." And he's like, "It already came out like 6 months ago."
Yeah, you missed it.
He's like, "Okay, nobody reads anymore. Nobody reads. It's okay." He's like, "Yeah, but the movie's coming out today." And then you have that awesome ending. And you're like, "Oh, well, it kind of worked."
But that's all Lovecraft, though, right? That's all falling into madness, and by the end, you are hysterically mad. And I just feel like this one didn't go that far into the madness.
Yeah. Well, and it gave you this sense of trajectory that Luke was going to be able to fix it or whatever. He's like, I'm going to solve this, right? And it looks like he's busting out of the mind prison. And then, okay, there's the brick wall. And then the bricks start breaking apart. And then, it's
but that wasn't because of him. That was because of his girlfriend, right? She was tearing Daniel down, and kind of with tearing him down, she was breaking down the walls of that mine trap.
Yeah, and then, so Luke doesn't have any agency in his own escape there. And then, the plan is what? Okay, well, you do the, sort of Fight Club or Exorcist ending, like literally the Exorcist ending, and it kind of was, losing steam at the end there for me. And I think it had also hadn't engaged me in a very interesting way earlier, because as we were discussing, he didn't have any reason to let Daniel out of the dollhouse in the first place. It just sort of happened, and it's like, oh, well, we need this to happen here in the script, so that's what's happening, okay? Just fucking deal with it.
Yeah, he should have needed something, or really needed something in order to bring him out, because that is the most extreme decision that he could have made, or solution to his problems, is to let this Pandora out of her box, or his box.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that I do agree with you. I think there should have been something more there. And it wasn't just that he got home and he was surrounded by his mom's madness in this house, and how the house now looks like a dilapidated mess compared to what it looked like before. And, the mirrors are broken, and, obviously she's going down into the mouth of madness. But that, I don't think, was enough for him to unlock that door.
Yeah. And he unlocks it like right after, his mom has an episode, and then he's just, hanging out on the bed. He's like, well, you can't sleep either. And he's talking to his, teddy bear or whatever. And he's like, well, all right, fuck it. And he just like gets up, moves to the other room.
Yeah, I was hoping there would have been like some more influence from Daniel. Although before he is let out of the dollhouse, you do see Daniel in some reflections. And so he is, like, it gives you the impression that he might always be with Luke. Luke just needs to be able to open up to him, but he could keep him contained if he didn't, believe in him.
Well, yeah, I mean, and if Daniel isn't real, if it's all Luke, and this is just a different side of Luke, or this Luke's madness or whatever else, then that would be, that metaphor works that way. It's just that he was able to sort of control it or repress it in a certain way, and then it would, again, it seems like if he was in school and had these this falling out, these stressors or whatever, like all this thing, and made him retreat back into Daniel land, it would both work better for the movie, and that's sort of how the plot propels things, and work better for how the character is developed. One thing that I thought was interesting between Daniel Isn't Real and Harvey is that, like, there's clearly Luke's mom is extremely wealthy, living in the brownstones in New York City, and whatever that is, Chelsea or wherever. Yeah. And she isn't high stress, Wall Street finance. It's like old money, because she just like sits around and does nothing.
But she still lived in that big house. How's she affording that mortgage? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, sort of like Harvey, you both have these sort of portraits of the ultra wealthy in a context of madness, which is I guess it's an easy way so that you don't have to like write her into doing work or whatever else. But it's also it just happened to be an interesting connection between these two.
Yeah. I thought they were very similar films.
Yeah, that's
like,
true.
I mean, once Luke meets his love interest, this artist, and she paints his portrait, and we see his shadow, or what she perceives as his shadow. I think that happened about the same time code as Harvey happened when he had the portrait painted of him with the rabbit, and it was the same exact thing. And arguably, Harvey was a scarier portrait than just the shadow with the crown, the skin crown or whatever he was wearing, right? Yeah, the fingernail crown.
Yeah, the melted candle.
Looked like a candle, yeah.
But man, how much did the Harvey portrait look like it belonged to that cult in True Detective, where it's just sort of horrifying woodland creatures or whatever.
Yeah, the the pagan ritual, oh god. So overall, I really enjoyed watching these movies. Not so much for the quality of the movies, although I really like Daniel. But it was nice to see how different storytellers can portray something that's so similar in many ways, especially between Harvey and Daniel. Tonally, obviously, very much different, but overall, like, very similar films. And Cloak and Dagger was kind of like the middle of the two in terms of, reality versus imaginary. And Cloak and Dagger just kind of had that at the end, but Daniel was real the whole time. Harvey, I guess, was real the whole time. And so those two were a little bit more similar than Cloak and Dagger in that respect.
Yeah, that's true. Although, with Luke, we do get that sort of child's perspective, which is, similar to Elliot in Cloak and Dagger. In both cases, Cloak and Dagger and Daniel, the imaginary friend acts as sort of a mentor and, a confidence booster and some of these things. and you know, it is wild to see how many like sort of connections there are.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Especially watching these movies so close together, you know, you'd never put Harvey and, you know, a current horror film in the same category, but they
Right.
are, I mean, like I said, and I keep repeating it, and I don't mean to do that, but beat for beat in most instances, they were hitting the same notes.
Where did you find Daniel Isn't Real, by the way? How did you hear about it? Just because of Spectrovision, or?
Yeah, pretty much. So, I mean, truth be told, I'm a horror junkie when it comes to these kinds of things. I follow all the podcasts.
I'm really proud of you admitting that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a problem, but you know, I'm dealing with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was listening to the Postmortem podcast with Mick Garris, who's he wrote and directed a bunch of horror movies. Yeah. And he has a podcast called Postmortem, and he had Elijah Wood and Adam Egypt Mortimer on doing an interview, and they were talking about this movie when it first released. And I was just, you know, I like these small independent releases. I think they're so much better than anything that goes into, especially horror movies. I think it's better than anything that goes into the Hollywood system, you know, the studio system. So I was really excited to watch something like this, and I'm glad we had a reason to watch it. But yeah, I heard about this probably when it first came out, because Shudder picked it up, and it was just going to be an independent film that was going to be shown at some festivals and possibly got some VOD distribution, which it did on Shudder.
Yeah, I found it hard to find, you know, out there. It's like, okay, you can rent it on iTunes, and I guess if you are, what do we call it, like subscribe to Shudder, it's on there. But is it out on Blu-ray or anything? Like, is there any other way to watch it?
I don't think there's a physical media of it. I mean, I'm sure there is, but I don't think it's for wide distribution.
What about VHS? Is it on VHS?
I think they only came out with a beta and a Laserdisc.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, hopefully you can watch it there.
Maybe someday we'll get the HD DVD of it. Yeah.
Well, cool. Let's wrap this up. We just talked about some films that touch on imaginary friends. Harvey, Cloak and Dagger, and Daniel Isn't Real. Again, you know, very similar films in terms of beats, but they, you know, all had their own voice, I'd say. You know, maybe a little bit more. Daniel Isn't Real. He's focused on a little bit more of trying to pull in a bunch of inspiration, but at the same time, I think that they all had their own place in this world of imaginary friend films. And yeah, that's it for today's Grindhouse Institute. Next week we'll be doing sequels, and specifically we're going to be doing sequels that are, I guess, arguably better than the original. I think that's how this came up.
I'll argue that. Yeah.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah.
I don't doubt it at all.
Get ready to argue.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back with our sequels that were better than the first one. I'm Brian Foster for the Grindhouse Institute.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Lady Ace, come in, Lady Ace.
Yeah, what?
Come on, Kim, play right.
This is what I meant by embarrassing.